Good morning, or good evening, or just be good any time of the day you happen to be viewing this. I'm Lois Perry, the director of CAR 26. CAR 26 stands for Climate, Analysis and Reason, and we believe in debate about climate change, not simply being told that the debate is over. With the cost of living crisis now top of the agenda for the British government and many governments around the world, our prediction of these troubled times late last year put us way ahead of the game with our analysis. Ban on the moratorium on fracking has been widely supported and we hope will lead to a change of government policy. We live in hope. We are not afraid to speak out on issues that concern us and should concern every single one of you, and we especially like talking to other brave and bold visionaries who speak their minds and back it up with evidence. Which debate is enhanced and enriched by allowing them to voice their opinions. Today, we are delighted to have someone who is not afraid of being controversial. I'm not going to go through his CV in detail, as you already know him. Outspoken contrarian, political thinker, former prisoner and LBC broadcaster, I welcome Maajid Nawaz. Hello.
Missed out Essex boy.
I did miss out Essex boy, and I shouldn't, because that's something that we've got in.
Absolutely. Right down to like
the road,
the area. I won't name the road on camera for you, but the area, the road, it's just a very, very wonderful coincidence.
Well, there must be something magic about Westcliff, mustn't there?
Well, a lot of good has come from it, and if you carry on the way you're going, hopefully it will continue to be so.
Oh,
Thank
well,
you.
I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. Well, you know why I'm here, and you know what my specialist interest is, and that's the climate zero. And what a time for us to be having this chat. I mean, what a time with everything that's been going on. And I want to talk to you about a lot of the predictions that you've made and how they've come true. But to start off with, I just want to get a sense from you of why you are interested now in the climate debate and net zero. Is it about control? Is it a libertarian issue for you? I mean, what's brought you to the table?
So that's a really good place to start. Look, I like to think of myself as somebody that cares for the planet, cares for plants and trees, and actually they need carbon dioxide. But that's a separate point.
Yeah.
Because they breathe it. But I like to consider myself as somebody that is aware of the needs of our environment, because we're all connected in that way, right? So the trees are connected underground in that way. So we have to at least be conscious of it. The problem occurred, I think, largely for me, when a bit like I draw the analogy, say with anti-racism, and I hope everyone is anti-racist, but that doesn't mean you have to support a specific way to be anti-racist, such as BLM. Yeah. So when I look at this situation, it's the same. Look, I'm Muslim. It doesn't mean I have to support the very politicized versions of Islam that claim to represent Muslims that cause some trouble, right? So everything I believe in terms of good causes is at risk of being weaponized. And I think that's what's happened to the climate debate. Like, we should make sure that our streets are clean. We should not drop litter. We should try and be efficient just for our own purposes when it comes to energy use and what have you. We should ideally have pollution-free streets, because we've got kids to worry about and they breathe on a level of pollution. But the way in which this debate's become weaponized is what I'm now alert to, and I perhaps wasn't in the past.
Right, yeah, and that's interesting you say that, because it's become streets and everything to do with controlling the movement of people and controlling people full stop, actually. And that was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. Sri Lanka, I mean, what's going on? It's insane. You've got people rioting on the streets, and the food prices are up 80% just in the last month, and they threw out their price.
So if you have a policy, that, say the net zero policy, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to start radically and drastically at speed, fundamentally changing the way in which our economy is organized, and you want to completely get rid of all carbon, and you want to bring in a lot of these electric compliances and vehicles and components, then something you have to think about is what I call energy security.
Yeah.
Because I've come from a national security background, one of the things that alerted me that perhaps I hadn't joined the dots before, let's say before I became aware of the Uyghur genocide in China. Yeah?
Okay.
That began the process in me of what I describe as, I was in my mind fighting a foreign ideological war. Yeah. So this encroaching technocracy that I saw coming from the one-party state of the CCP in China,
okay,
and the way in which they were using technology to score dissident communities. So in the case of the Uyghurs, what they started doing was basically scoring their behavior with social credit systems, and you cannot buy a train ticket if, for example, you've misbehaved and upset the authorities.
It's terrifying.
And it's all linked to a digital identity.
Yeah.
So when I started looking at that, I began realizing, hold on, this is a system. It's not unique to China. If we import that system, then what I'm worried about happening there can start happening here. And suddenly, like a row of dominoes, the dots started joining for me in a way that I started realizing that this net zero policy they've got here, yeah, one of the problems from an energy security perspective is, let's take, for example, the electric cars. Now, the components you need from that are sourced, for example, from countries where we may not control that supply. If we transfer our entire economy, that is then reliant on Russian gas as an example, for Germany, right? But say we did it with the microchips that we need, yeah? And it's reliant on Taiwan. And say China goes into Taiwan, and they haven't gone in yet, but they did in Hong Kong. And we never thought that would happen, right? So say, for example, they go into Taiwan. Now, the best case scenario of that happening, because they're, by the way, telling us they are going to go into Taiwan, and all of those raw earth materials that we need, rare earth materials that we need are going to come from, coming from Taiwan at the moment, producing a disproportionate amount of the world's microchips and all of the tiny electronics we need for these so-called carbon-free electronic compliances.
It's a new dependence. In the same way we, there was criticism of us being dependent on oil nations. It's just it's just switching the nations around.
So Sri Lanka, what happened, right? So you've got a scenario in Sri Lanka where if you're dependent, so China, by the way, was very heavily invested in Sri Lanka with Belt and Road as well, yeah? And they own some of the ports and stuff. But if you're dependent as a nation and your economy is dependent on outside forces, the minute those outside forces can no longer provide you what you need, you end up, in the case of Sri Lanka, with food shortages and inflation.
Yeah.
In the case of us, if we were dependent on Taiwan for our electric cars and stuff, if China went in, the best case scenario is we go to war over it. Worst case scenario, we leave it alone. And I'm being facetious, war's never a good thing.
No.
What I'm trying to say is it's disaster whichever way you look at it.
It is. I mean, specifically at Sri Lanka, they were forced, encouraged /forced by funds including Google, Disney and JP Morgan to go organic with their and not use fertilizer, and their rice crops by these green people, green elites if you like, to not use the fertilizer, and they can't eat, and then they only be sold to people that had essential vehicles. I mean, this is an ideology at play here.
That's right. The people that are invested behind this, let's not forget that they are the ones investing in fake meat companies.
Yeah.
Right. So they're the ones investing in the case of vaccine mandates. The same people were invested in whether that be the pharmaceutical companies or the app or the vaccine technology itself.
Okay.
So they stand to make money from it in the meanwhile, and everybody else has to suffer. So when I started looking at it from an energy security perspective, I thought it's impossible as a nation, if you want to remain a sovereign nation, to be dependent for your fundamentals on any other country, especially with the instability we see around us at the moment. That means we need to be energy independent in Britain.
Yeah.
We need to be food independent. Now, that doesn't mean don't trade with anyone. It means at least have a plan that the bare necessities
staple
can be met.
Yeah.
And so that's what made me realise that this net zero agenda that the government's adopted is absolutely bonkers from a national security perspective. It is mad.
And that's when you started, as you say, joining the dots and started seeing that there was something else or something wrong here.
The way in which racism was weaponised through the BLM.
Yeah.
You can see this demand that everyone had to take a knee. Now, I know what...
It was a demand, wasn't it?
Yeah. I know what racism is. Yeah. I have scars on my body from knife fights I've had with skinheads in Essex growing up. I know what racism is. I'm talking... Before I turned 16, I've watched more people stabbed than most people would have watched in their lifetime. Friends of mine in street battles with Nazis. Before I turned 17, I saw a street murder by machete. Right? I watched it happen. Now, I know what racism is, and yet I'm saying what BLM were demanding was a bit over the top. So it's the weaponization of a debate, yeah?
No, absolutely. It's like my and if one of them was walking down the road with my mum, who's what, they stopped and said, is he bothering you?
Yeah.
And she said, he's my son. And
so to dismiss these things doesn't mean you're suddenly a racist. It means you don't agree with the way the group is doing it. So take that with the green agenda. It's like people need to understand that a policy isn't a cause.
No.
And so we've got to be able to divorce those two and then realise what's the policies that we're being fed? What are they about? And so...
Why are they weaponising it?
Yeah. And so...
Where's the money?
If you then start joining the dots, if the net zero agenda with electric cars is connected to, say, digital identities and is all connected to centralised data systems, then what you've set up is a scenario where they call it smart cities, yeah? You've got a scenario where you cannot function in a city without your digital identity.
Car won't start.
That digital identity will be connected to what the Chinese call a social credit score.
Yeah.
So your carbon, for example, if you're deemed as having used too much carbon on this day, for example, maybe you ate a burger and they define meat as being bad for carbon emissions. So you've eaten your quota of a burger for lunch, you now can't have a steak for dinner because when you're trying to use your digital currency, with your digital identity, it will stop you and say, sorry, you've met your carbon threshold today. Now that may sound like it's a Black Mirror episode.
But it isn't,
it's happening in China as we speak. And if you read their net zero agenda and all the other agendas they've laid out for you and spelled out, that's all connected.
But it's got net zero agenda, yet they're the ones that are building the most, burning the most coal, and it's just absolutely insane.
It's also mad because also where it's got electric cars, right? So they use electric batteries. Where do they, when you charge them, that comes from electricity. Yeah, what makes the electricity?
Coal, probably.
Coal,
it's not wind farms, is it?
It's not. No. And we don't have nuclear the way France does, right? So where's it coming from? We're going to charge our electric cars with electricity. What are we burning to make that electricity? And when you think of it like that, you realise what the scam is.
Massive scam. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, this lots of your predictions have come true, haven't they?
I call them forecasts.
Okay, all right, forecasts. Canadian truckers, food shortages leading to uprisings, Sri Lanka, the Dutch farmers, the Italian and German farmers, the burning down of agricultural facilities, Holland, Pakistan, I mean...
So what I've done...
all of these are countries, I mean, you're not happy about it, but it is extraordinary.
COVID and beyond had a bit of a awakening of consciousness. Everyone, I think, that's been engaged in the debate.
I certainly did.
Yeah. And so when I started looking at the dots, I realised, as I said earlier, that if I was fighting a foreign war and I hadn't realised how it was connected to the domestic debate, you'll see that my journey has been, for example, I'm known that I opposed Brexit. And on radio, for example, I've actually gone to debate with people on the climate stuff. When I started some of these connections we're talking about now, I had to, like anyone I believe who's seeking the truth needs to do, adjust based upon the new evidence that became available.
Yeah.
It became impossible to deny during the COVID period that there was something wrong with policy in the way that they were doing it. Was really weird, right?
Yeah.
So when you start joining those dots, and so I was able as a result of that to say, if what I've understood to be happening is happening, then this is what I think will happen next. And so that's what I did on the Rogan episode. Yeah. And because the war with Ukraine had just kicked off, I was able to say, you're saying you're going to sanction Russia. Well, this is what's going to happen from an energy security perspective if you sanction Russia. Well, you're not going to have any fertilizer. You're not going to have any gas. Right now, as we speak, Germany's in 10 days of no gas from Russia because the Nord Stream's been shut down.
That's right, and
until July 21st.
Is that correct? And I said earlier, actually, when we were talking about the wood, that they're actually houses in Germany for people to ban. Okay, if you've got a farmhouse, how are you going to do it?
Their hot water is currently rationed.
Is it?
Yeah. Because of this shutdown of Nord Stream. So it was, for me, it was easy to forecast. If you've joined the dots in that way and you can see what you're telling me you're going to do, if I take it at face value, which I think we need to do, right? If they're telling us this is what net zero means, they're the ones telling us, right? We can then draw conclusions from that.
Why are we doing this? Why are these countries doing it to themselves, though? It's self-harm. So
that assumes that the leaders are acting from their own will. I don't think they are.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that if you look to the boasts of the World Economic Forum,
right,
what Klaus Schwab has told us already at Harvard University is that his graduates of his Young Global Leaders program have, his word, penetrated the cabinets around the world. And he then said half of Canada's cabinet's been penetrated.
Was he stroking a white cat when he said it?
Baron Greenback in Danger Mouse, right? Remember that?
No, I think like the Bond villain.
Something Baron Greenback is as bad, right? And Danger Mouse and Penfold had to come in and say,
Danger Mouse is good, wasn't it? Yeah.
So if you look at it from a perspective of, and this is my background. So my background is ideological subversion and how to subvert systems from within, using ideological propaganda. So if you look at it from that perspective, what Klaus Schwab has got in the form of the World Economic Forum is the ideal subversive tool, because he's got what he calls these young global leaders. If you've got the money, you can do this. I mean, I could tell you how to do it, but I don't have the money. He's got the money, right? So he was able over the last 40 or so years to groom, in the meaning of train, these young leaders around the world and watch them grow. And as you watch them grow, as long as they're under your remit, you develop compromat on.
Of course, yeah.
But at the same time, the people you've got compromat on, you promote.
Yeah.
Because it serves you that they're in positions of power once you've got compromat on them.
You've got something on them.
And so then they're in each of these positions. He's already boasting that they're his people, yeah? And that's it. Once they're in power, why? Why though? Why does the WEF want to do this? If you cause the collapse of these national states through the perfect storm of destroying their economies with these insane policies, printing money.
Well, Holland,
exactly.
As well. Right now, the farmers.
That's right.
As you've said before, they're testing it. They're having their land literally taken off them because they're being told that normal farming is wrong suddenly, and there's they.
And so what happens is riots. So you mentioned Sri Lanka, so that causes the riots. In Holland right now, police opened fire, live rounds on a farmer.
That's terrible.
So he causes the instability, like as in Canada, and the provocation is deliberate because it seeks a violent response. Why? Because when you get that violent response, it's the perfect way to roll in the army, to take over from within, using a pretext that people will be begging.
Powers.
The people are begging for it, as we were during COVID. Please give us.
When the Reichstag was burnt down and they blamed it on the communists.
That's right. And then so you come in, you take over, and you've got your global governance, which is what literally they're calling the New World Order. Now that President Biden has given a speech in which he has said we are entering a new world order, and the last time it's happened, this is again a quote from his speech. He said 60 million people had to die.
Is that what he said?
Yeah. He's talking about, obviously, World War II.
Did he then read out again, repeat that line?
No. This time...
that time he was on the board. Yeah. No, I'm making a joke, but this is the...
But they did. They rolled out the troops in Sri Lanka. So it's already in play. What I was saying would happen in terms of forecasts is happening now. So
you would have thought civil unrest in Germany.
Exactly.
You just wouldn't think it, would you? They do as they're told. They'll pull out of the traffic lights at the same time.
The problem is there's not much we can do against this because it's already in play. Right. The only thing we can do is if we know that violence is what they're counting on, because through violence you bring troops to the streets, then the resistance has to be non-violent.
Okay.
Yeah, so it has to be what we call non-violent resistance in the form of Martin Luther King, Gandhi, that idea of what Mandela adopted after prison, that idea of civic struggle for our rights through non-violent resistance, peaceful protest.
Peaceful disobedience.
Peaceful protest. Against globalism. If we resort to violence, and some people will, but we've got to make sure that doesn't get used as an excuse for a takeover of nation states.
Well, the footage that I saw the other day was literally this guy in Germany who there's a policeman around. Which was pretty impactful video.
The UK, I think, for various complex historical political reasons, being the philosophical original home of even liberalism, the mother of parliaments, I think it's a lot harder to get that plan in the UK. I think the resistance here is quite strong.
We're wriggling, aren't we?
But that's because we're an island nation, and island nations have always had this sense of fierce sense of self,
which is why the breaking down of the union is so important to a certain agenda.
See, that's what but that's what I later realised about Brexit. Right. I realised, wow, at least we're not in that bloc, the EU, that is pretty much under China's foot. basically.
Well, I mean, people obviously been very heavily critical of Boris, but if you actually look at us compared to the rest of Europe in terms of coming out of lockdown quicker and not having the vaccine passports, I mean, it wasn't in Paris you can buy a cup of coffee unless you had an app on your phone.
Yeah.
We never got to that stage, did we? So.
Well, I think
That's what I wanted to ask you. What next?
So I think the leadership contest currently here in the UK is part of this. So if you look back to when what I call corporatist media turned against Boris Johnson, if you remember, it was when he refused to do the winter lockdown.
Yes.
And then what happened is these photos emerged of that party in Downing Street, the height of lockdown there, and everyone was breaking the rules. But where were those photos taken from?
Well, they've been sitting on them for ages.
But which angle? Do you see the angle of the photos? They were taken from which vantage point? And it's clear now.
Looking down.
From number 11.
I've heard that from other sources, that he linked them to Dominic Cummings.
Rishi Sunak was in touch with Cummings, and those photos look as if they were taken from number 11, and the rest is history. Now he's the front runner to replace PM Johnson. Now, one thing that's interesting with Rishi Sunak is, already, it's another thing I mentioned on Rogan, already he's declared his support for central banking digital coupons, right?
Yeah, so that's...
Which you cannot separate from net zero.
No.
And digital identities.
Because it's all part of the same...
social credit score.
Social credit score, the carbon. And
that's right.
They're doing adverts actually on television at the moment for vegan meat, and it's aimed at young people, and it's quite subversive actually. The name of the company is called No Sacrifice.
Yeah.
So they're making the point that they're putting it into young people's heads. You are sacrificing humans and things, don't you? You don't normally think about animals. And I thought that's very subversive, that they're putting it into insects in our food and all of that. But I'm very, very concerned at the moment about what's going on with farming and everything. And wind farms taking up all the farmland. And
one of the benefits of destroying the nation state and having this global governance is you end up with this super elite globally that have all the wealth. Now we've seen that wealth transfer from COVID. We saw it from 2008 onwards, right? That wealth transfer. So people have realised, people that have the wealth have realised that a lot of people that don't have the wealth are waking up to the fact that the financial system is stacked against them. So you've got to, in that scenario, either share the spoils, but obviously someone being selfish doesn't want to do that, or you close the roads that make it possible ever again to be able to share those spoils. So if you've got that global governance system, you've destroyed all the farmland, people are on fake meat and insects. Meanwhile,
universal basic income, because
that's
all
right.
the businesses have gone under, because you've got 90% of businesses, family businesses.
So everyone's dependent on the state that you control, and you own all the farmland.
Yeah, you control the means of food production, you control everything.
It's a dystopian scenario, right? And that's what the problem is with it, is that you can take this idea of let's be kind to the planet and weaponize it to a point where you can use it to enslave the human species. Likewise with the financial system. So what's happened, if you control, and this is the definition of fascism, if the state and business, corporates, merge, that's fascism. That's what Mussolini did. So you got big tech and corporate media, state, and they're pretty much all singing from the same hymn sheet today. Yeah. And that's it's very dangerous, because that's what leads to fascism.
It does.
And we saw that during the COVID mandate period. They had the power to institute fascism.
Well, absolutely. And it's like the weaponisation, again, of normal things, like you were talking about. But, for example, at the moment, we're sitting here, we're hot, aren't we? It is very, very hot. But it's not unusual. You know, it's not hotter than it was 100 years ago when they had a very hot summer, or 5 years ago. You know, but the BBC and the Met Office are collaborating. It's the way that they're presenting the weather to go with the whole global warming. Interviewing kids saying, oh yeah, you know, it's so hot because the world's burning up. And
well, if you look back to the headlines, again, from a media perspective, having some experience in that side as well, if you look back to the headlines when we were young, and you might even remember this, Lois, the problem wasn't the heat. The problem was we're headed towards a new ice age. That was the narrative. Right. Do you remember that? They said new ice age is coming, and we were all scared.
We thought Blue Peter.
And we thought, how do we survive this coming ice age, right? Then it became warming. Yes. Then people noticed the contradiction. So then it became climate change.
Yeah, because we haven't had any warming for quite a considerable.
It went from cooling to warming to climate change, right? And just looking at the media narratives, you've got to see, I'm not a climate scientist. I am, however, somebody that's been in the media for a long time as a media professional, as a broadcaster. So I have the ability to look at headlines and realize I see bullshit where I see it. And so when you start looking at these politicized headlines that are sensationalist and are designed to strike fear into people, whether it be with COVID, the climate situation, it could be anything, yeah? It could be terrorism, Trump supporters are terrorists. If you want people scared, then you've always got to ask, hey, why does the media want the public in a permanent state of fear?
And against each other.
Yeah, what does that serve?
Then.
Because then you
divide them all.
Right, so you're not looking left and right.
No.
Sorry, you're not looking up, you're looking left and right, and we should be looking up.
Well, it's like the demonisation of gay people and drag queens and stuff. I'm finding that quite difficult at the moment because there's been a mix-up in people's minds about the annihilation of female rights through, toilet facilities and stuff like that for little girls, and mixing it all up with gay people and drag queens who are just performers. They're not really like drag, and I've got a huge amount of gay male friends. In fact, I don't really have any female friends. And they don't want to be lumped into all the weird politicisation of strange stuff that's going on, and that seems very deliberate to me.
Well, it's the cultural
as
wars,
well.
right? So if I'm sitting, so we're both from Essex, right? So if I'm sitting there in Southend, right, and I'm saying, I don't like because you're a non-Muslim, and you're sitting there saying, I don't like you because you're Muslim, and then we're arguing over, you're talking about grooming gangs, and I'm talking about Nazis, and we're fighting each other, then of course what we're not doing is looking up.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say grooming gangs isn't a real problem, and it's not to say that racism isn't a real problem.
No.
But the thing is, you're not doing that, and I'm not doing that.
No, that's
so we shouldn't have to be like arguing with each other over something we can condemn on both sides. What affects us both directly, though, is if, for example, we don't have financial independence.
Or like the money can be frozen because of your carbon situation.
Or because you criticise the wrong politician.
Well, absolutely. Back in October last year, around the time of COP26, we did polling which showed that 58% of those wanted to have a referendum on net zero. And we were quite surprised by that because, that was before the cost of living stuff really kicked off. It was before the war, and it was before people really started noticing, on their pockets. And I mean, I actually think that figure would be a lot higher now, but it is a really big consideration for people. But you wouldn't think from the trades that anyone has a different view on net zero or anything at all. But I just wanted to talk to you about we've touched on leadership stuff. What do you think? Really? Do you think that it was an agenda to get Boris out right from well above?
Well, so I believe that this is a domestic palace coup to serve the global palace coup.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that Johnson, after he refused that second lockdown, was basically, not whether he's conscious of it or not is a different topic, but he was in the way of this desire for the next stage of the WEF lockstep agenda. What's the next stage? Well, you had COVID. You had the Ukraine war. And so what COVID did is it basically set the stage for the infrastructure needed for the control mechanisms. And the Ukraine war has allowed for the gas and the grain supplies to be stopped. So you've got these supply side problems.
Because Ukraine is one of the biggest suppliers of grain. Is that across Europe?
Across the world.
Across the world?
Yeah. As is Russia. So Russia add that fertilizer to it and you've got most of the world's grain gone. Right?
Okay.
So those crises have served a certain purpose when it comes to the WEF agenda at least. And that, of course, they have their own dynamics at play as well there. But from the WEF perspective, they've served those purposes. Now, what is coming next is, as a result of those food shortages, you're going to see political instability and uprisings. Dutch farmers, Sri Lankan uprising. In Pakistan, it's already happened as well.
At the same time, people don't have any energy security at all.
So if the economies...
Zero.
That's right. And if the economies start collapsing as a result, that's the next stage, is to intervene in a way that controls the demolition of the economies and allows a replacement that the state can control in their place. So the PM, having served through that COVID period, I think that the coup that even Nadine Dorries is going around saying it's a coup, in today's papers, it's a headline. Yeah, so she's saying it as it is. This is good.
Yeah.
I like people that speak how they are. I don't know her, but I just like everyone needs to be more honest.
I've warmed to.
I don't know her, and I've no judgment on her apart from she's being honest in this case, and that's good, right? I give credit where credit is due.
Hunt, didn't she?
Credit where credit is due. So she's used the word coup in today's headlines. You'll see it.
Okay, yeah.
And because I'm writing my very next Substack piece is on this topic.
Okay.
It'll probably be out by the time this interview is released. But I agree with the fact there's a domestic coup that's happened. The only difference is I then link it to the global coup that we're talking about with the WEF. And I think that what the certain, let's call them globalist establishment, want is a fresh face to fulfill the next chapter in that lockstep agenda. And the next chapter is CBDCs and the financial replacements because of the economy going down.
I always like to be hopeful. I'd like to think that the next leader will want energy security and will be pro-business and low tax.
Yeah. Which is why it must not be Rishi Sunak.
Okay.
And I'm not political in the party's answer, so I can't say.
Are you hopeful, Maajid?
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah.
You've got to be hopeful. That's because you're Essex.
Well, I mean, I think, as I say earlier, pessimism is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
it is. It is.
Yeah, and that's also the island spirit, you know.
Yeah, totally.
I think that there's something very unique about the United Kingdom for so many complex reasons. But I'm quite optimistic, as happened during World War II. Look, we didn't get caught up in the madness in Europe.
No.
With World War II, right?
No.
That happened, and the United Kingdom, though it had appeasement, eventually self-corrected. Churchill came along, and we know what happened next. So there's something unique about this particular nation and this island. And so I am cautiously optimistic, but having said that, that doesn't mean there's not going to be hardship along the way, and I think we'll have a lot more hardship before we start seeing.
Do you think that there is an awakening, people after COVID being more aware and looking at things more critically? I mean, you've been an extraordinary part of that, people opening their eyes, and I hope in my small way, since I launched Card 26, people felt more comfortable about looking at the different sites and looking at all the different, policies and thinking, hang on a minute, as you said, who is this serving?
Yeah, and I think that awakening is going to continue because whether it was 2008, so we can actually pinpoint changes in consciousness from these milestones. So if you look at the 2008 World Economic Crash, the idea of the 1%, you can place it to the protests that occurred after the 2008 economic crash. The idea of corporates and banks being too big to fail and the elite 1% and the 19% all came from 2008's crash. If you look to the COVID crisis, the idea that that there's the state has this absolute power over individual liberty, that's now awoken in the consciousness of the people.
Yeah, we didn't even think about it like that before.
Yeah.
We thought, at wartime, and that's sort of been romanticised to a certain extent. Oh, you've got to be in at a certain time. But there's a war on. We never thought it would happen now, did we?
So people are now aware, for example, that media narratives serve the state agenda. That's what COVID did. Just like the 2008 thing about the 1%, 99%, COVID made us realise that corporatist media is serving a state agenda. Yeah. So each time these crises happen, take the war on terror, people started realising, the weaponization of the extremism debate to serve the state's ends, People started realising also maybe some communities are being scapegoated for foreign policy agendas like invading countries, So each time this happens,
what's really going
the consciousness raises. So I'm optimistic for that reason because I've noticed that consciousness rising each crisis, So whatever the next one is and the next one, people will suffer, but the aggregate effect is more and more people wake up.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to 2019. You had a caller that was backing Donald Trump, and you said there's a near climate scientist consensus that man-made climate change is real. And I think we've already answered the question, what made you change your view? We've already answered that question, haven't we?
I went to a protest. I mean, this is that. So,
but was that because you were angry with Trump? To be honest, about the ban on Muslims not being able to come to America.
And so
did it all get mixed up?
But why did it get mixed up? Because
because they were deliberately mixing narratives, weren't they?
And divide and rule was a deliberate strategy. And I'm looking at foreign stuff. So I'm looking China, and I hadn't looked and realised that globalization has meant there is no more foreign policy, domestic policy. It's all one. And so look at internet communications, right? So there used to be such a thing as domestic media and foreign media.
Not now.
Right? So anything I tweet, I could be tweeting right now, about something that is very local to Southend in Essex, but it's going to go to a global audience immediately, just by the fact that I'm using a certain platform, right? So Call that global.
A little village in Holland.
Yeah, so call it, exactly, so call it global, right? Global and local mixed in one.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
But what that means is we've got a situation where we've got this very unique challenge that we want to protect our own sovereignty in a context where the whole world can see what we're doing. It's very unique.
You're right. Yeah, all the windows are open.
Yeah, all the windows are open. I'm still saying this is my private house.
Yeah.
But all my windows are open.
The nets are up.
It's very unique. But we've got to manage to do it somehow. Because what we can't have, obviously...
They want to break the UK, interestingly enough, because the symbolism of it is so extraordinary.
Yeah, that's right.
The mother of all parliaments, as you say, our family.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I find it quite hard to be objective on this, actually.
Look, I've always been somebody that's not really had much time for elite royalty. Anyway, all I'm going to do is say the people can see where the answers are. We don't need any family to tell us that, and I'm glad that the British public, especially through COVID, a lot of people began seeing stuff, and ultimately it had to be stopped because you can't go against your own public, whether you're Prince Charles or anyone else.
No, you can't go against your own public.
Makes it very difficult for them.
No, it does.
Yeah.
Who do you think is going to be the leader?
Forecast.
Yeah, go on.
Right, so
why not? Because you're so good at this.
Listen, you could stitch it. You could stitch it up, right? So you could make it Rishi Sunak versus somebody that nobody would ever vote for. You know, so you could stitch it up in that way. I think if we end up with a Liz Truss against Rishi Sunak, then Liz Truss would probably win.
Okay.
But it depends who's in that final runoff.
We like this.
Yeah. So the way to avoid. See, the globalists wouldn't want Liz in that position, right?
So that's why I like it.
So the way to avoid it, you'd put Rishi with somebody that's unelectable or is electable but doesn't have the experience and therefore might win next time.
I'm going to bring up the waistcoat and I'm going to towel you. Yeah.
All right, okay.
She doesn't know it yet, but it is going to happen. Okay. You're feeling positive broadly, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, optimism, but it's a long-term thing.
All right, thank you.
Thank
you so much. Maajid,
Thank you very much. Absolute pleasure. Thanks.